Crystal Gayle became a household name in 1977 with "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue," a crossover smash that turned her into one of country music's most recognizable stars. With her signature floor-length hair and a string of #1 hits through the 70s and 80s, her career looked effortless from the outside. But behind the success, Crystal's life was shaped by pressure, comparison, and a quiet struggle to step out of her sister's shadow. Being constantly measured against Loretta Lynn came with expectations she could never fully escape, and it left scars few people noticed. Still, that wasn't the heaviest weight she carried. For nearly 30 years, Crystal Gayle was living a double life, hiding something so personal that even those closest to her didn't know the full truth. And once you understand why she kept it secret for so long, it changes the way you see her story entirely. So, what was she hiding? And why did it take decades for the truth to finally come out? Join us as we get into all the details. Crystal Gayle's quiet beginning, the childhood that made a country icon. Crystal Gayle was born Brenda Gayle Webb on January 9, 1951, in Paintsville, Kentucky, the last of 8 children in a family that already knew hardship well. While her siblings were born at home, she arrived in a hospital, a small detail that felt symbolic later on, as if her life was always meant to unfold a little differently from the rest. She grew up surrounded by brothers and sisters who were already forming their own identities, including one who would go on to become a legend herself. Her parents, Clara Marie Clary and Melvin Theodore Ted Webb, were doing what families in eastern Kentucky had always done, surviving where they could. Her father worked as a coal miner, a job that slowly damaged his lungs and shaped the family's future, long before anyone realized it. Through her mother's side, Crystal was also distantly related to Patty Loveless, another voice born out of the same Appalachian soil. The family spoke openly about their Irish and Cherokee roots, though Crystal herself was never enrolled in any native tribe. Identity, even then, was something layered and complicated. When Crystal was just 4 years old, her father's health forced the family to leave Kentucky in search of better medical care. They relocated to Wabash, Indiana, settling into a retired miners' community where life was quieter but no less demanding. Her mother began working as a nurse's aide, carrying the household while her father's condition worsened. In 1959, Ted Webb died from a stroke, and just like that, Crystal's childhood was marked by loss before she was old enough to understand what it meant. Music entered her life early, almost instinctively. Crystal later reflected that she could sing before she could walk, and no one who heard her doubted it. Their new home in Wabash sat somewhere between rural and suburban, giving her a wider world than the hills of Butcher Hollow, but still close enough to feel familiar. She spent hours singing along to the radio, absorbing melodies and phrasing without realizing she was training herself. And hovering over it all was the influence of her older sister, Loretta Lynn, whose voice and success quietly shaped Crystal's earliest musical dreams. As she grew older, singing stopped being something she simply loved and became something she worked at. She sang in church, leaned into folk music, and began recording demo tapes, learning how her voice sounded when it was captured and played back. With Loretta's encouragement, Crystal started touring during her high school summers, stepping into the rhythm of life on the road, while still trying to be a teenager. The balance was never easy, but it taught her discipline early. At just 16, Crystal found herself standing on one of country music's most sacred stages, the Grand Ole Opry, filling in for Loretta when illness kept her sister away. That night, she sang Gordon Lightfoot's Ribbon of Darkness. And, for the first time, she wasn't simply Loretta Lynn's little sister. She was holding the room on her own. After graduating high school in 1970, Crystal signed her first recording contract with Decca Records, the same label associated with her sister. But even that came with complications. Decca already had a singer named Brenda Lee on its roster, and there wasn't room for another Brenda. A name change became necessary, not optional. The solution came unexpectedly. While driving past a Crystal fast food restaurant, Loretta remarked that crystals are bright and shiny. And just like that, a new identity clicked into place. Brenda Gayle Webb became Crystal Gayle, her last name borrowed from her middle name. Her first name transformed into something that finally felt like her own. It was the beginning of a career, yes, but it was also the start of a lifelong balancing act, carving out space in an industry that already knew her family name and learning how to exist as herself without being swallowed by it. Crystal Gayle's breaking point, how she escaped Loretta Lynn's shadow and changed country music forever. When Crystal Gayle first stepped into the industry, she didn't walk in alone. After signing with Decca Records, her early career was placed firmly under the guidance of Oliver Lynn, Loretta Lynn's husband, who took on the role of her first manager. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it locked Crystal into a version of herself she hadn't chosen yet. Her earliest professional appearances followed that same pattern. She became a regular on the Country Palace, performing songs written not by herself, but by Loretta. Tracks like Sparklin' Look of Love and Mama, It's Different This Time put her voice in front of audiences. But they also reinforced the comparison she would spend years trying to escape. Even before she had a chance to introduce who she really was, the industry had already decided how she should sound. In 1970, Crystal released her debut single, I've Cried, The Blue Right Out of My Eyes, another Loretta Lynn composition. The song did well enough, reaching the top 40 on the Billboard country chart, but it didn't open doors the way a debut was supposed to. It was followed by modest releases like Everybody Ought to Cry and I Hope You're Having Better Luck Than Me, songs that charted quietly and disappeared just as quickly. Behind the scenes, her momentum stalled. Decca wanted her to sound like Loretta. Crystal wanted room to breathe. Critics noticed the tension. AllMusic's Steve Huey dismissed those early singles as Little Loretta records. And historians Mary A. Buffwack and Robert K. Orman later suggested Crystal had been stigmatized from the start for being Loretta Lynn's sister. Years later, Crystal herself put it bluntly, reflecting that it didn't take long to realize she was only there because of who she was related to. The truth landed harder when it came directly from Loretta. She urged Crystal to stop singing her songs, reminding her that there was already one Loretta Lynn, and the world didn't need another. That conversation changed everything. By 1974, Crystal walked away from Decca, choosing uncertainty over a career that wasn't really hers. That choice led her to United Artists Records, and for the first time, the story shifted. Under the guidance of producer Alan Reynolds, Crystal's sound softened, slowed down, and finally began to reflect who she was instead of who she was expected to be. Reynolds, fresh off success with Don Williams, pushed Crystal toward a mellower, more intimate style and deliberately positioned her for crossover appeal. Her first United Artists single, Restless, released in 1974, didn't dominate the charts, but it made a statement. Writers described it as assertive and sexy, a noticeable departure from her earlier work. That same year, her self-titled debut album arrived and climbed into the top 25 on the country albums chart. It wasn't explosive, but it was steady, and more importantly, it felt authentic. In 1975, things finally began to click. Wrong Road Again, written by Alan Reynolds, became Crystal's first top 10 country hit. Follow-up singles like This Is My Year for Mexico and Beyond You kept her name moving upward, with Beyond You marking a personal milestone as a co-write with her husband, Bill Gatzimos. Her second album, Somebody Loves You, pushed her momentum further, delivering another top 10 hit with its title track. The industry noticed the difference immediately. Critics praised her new direction, comparing her easy, unforced delivery to artists like Emmylou Harris and highlighting the quiet charm that separated her from louder, sharper country voices of the era. Alan Reynolds' gentle production style became a perfect match for Crystal's voice, creating records that felt intimate without feeling small. By 1976, Reynolds brought in songwriters Bob McDill and Richard Lee, and the payoff was immediate. I'll Get Over You became Crystal's first #1 country hit, followed closely by another chart topper, You Never Miss a Real Good Thing, Till He Says Goodbye, and a strong #2 with I'll Do It All Over Again. Her third album, Crystal, climbed to #7 on the country albums chart, confirming that this wasn't luck. It was alignment. Still, Reynolds believed something bigger was coming if they could find the right song. In 1977, Richard Lee played him a track titled Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue, originally intended for Shirley Bassey. Reynolds shut that idea down instantly. That song, he knew, wasn't going anywhere else. Crystal recorded the track almost casually, laying down a guide vocal in a single take. When she tried to re-record it later, the magic was gone. The first take stayed. When the song was released, it didn't just succeed, it exploded. It hit #1 on the country chart, crossed over to #2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and became an international hit, including a top 5 placement in the UK. Critics praised her restrained, effortless delivery, noting how she let the song breathe instead of forcing emotion. Overnight, it became her signature. That same year, We Must Believe in Magic arrived, pushing Crystal even further into history. The album climbed to #2 on the country chart and cracked the Billboard 200, earning widespread praise and, eventually, platinum certification. It became the first platinum album by a female country artist, a milestone that quietly rewrote the rules. In 1978, Crystal earned the Grammy Award for Best Female Country Vocal Performance, while Richard Lee took home Best Country Song. The momentum didn't slow. When I Dream followed in 1978, producing another #1 hit with Talking in Your Sleep, a song that crossed over yet again and found international success. Additional hits like Why Have You Left the One You Left Me For and the album's title track kept her firmly at the top. By the end of that year, Crystal Gayle was named Female Vocalist of the Year by both the Academy of Country Music and the Country Music Association. Before leaving United Artists, she released We Should Be Together in 1979, closing the chapter with 2 more top 10 hits. By then, the transformation was complete. Crystal Gayle was no longer standing in anyone's shadow. She had built a sound, a presence, and a career that belonged entirely to her. Crystal Gayle's quiet constant, the love story that held everything together. For all the fame and movement in Crystal Gayle's life, there has always been one steady presence anchoring everything else. Crystal Gayle has been married to Bill Gatzimos since 1971, a relationship that began long before awards, chart records, or sold-out tours entered the picture. They first dated in high school, back when the future was still wide open, and none of this was guaranteed. As Crystal's career gained momentum, Bill was building his own path. While she was signed to United Artists Records and finding her footing as an artist, he attended law school at Vanderbilt University, choosing not to orbit her success, but to grow alongside it. When law school ended, their worlds finally merged in a practical way. Bill became Crystal's manager and later the president of their company, Gayle Enterprises, quietly handling the business side while she stayed focused on the music. Crystal has often explained that the strength of their marriage comes from something simple but rare. They never tried to shrink each other. Each pursued their own interests, gave each other room to breathe, and trusted that the partnership didn't require constant control to survive. In an industry where relationships often collapse under pressure, theirs settled into something durable and unshowy. Parenthood arrived later, on their own terms. Their daughter, Catherine, was born in 1983, followed by their son, Christos, in 1986. Even then, Crystal didn't step away from the stage entirely. She has spoken about the intensity of those early years, recalling moments when she would walk off stage, breastfeed, and return for another show. It was exhausting, unsentimental, and real. By the time their second child arrived, she made a different choice, staying home more and letting the pace slow down. That decision didn't mean music left the house. Years later, Christos would grow up to become a record producer, eventually co-producing Crystal's 2019 album. It was a quiet, full-circle moment, one that reflected how deeply her personal and professional worlds had always been intertwined without being forced. Today, her life has widened again, this time through her grandchildren, Elijah and Bjorn. Crystal has spoken about how being a grandmother gave her something she missed the first time around. Holidays feel fuller now, baking cookies, lingering in the small moments, and staying present in ways touring once made difficult. She has admitted that leaving for the road is harder now, that there's a pull to be home, to not miss anything. Elijah, she said, is a bright spot, someone whose joy makes you want to slow down and take it all in. In a career defined by reinvention and resilience, Crystal Gayle's marriage and family life tell a different kind of success story. Crystal Gayle's quiet burdens, loss, comparison, and the price of standing apart. One of the deepest wounds in Crystal Gayle's life came long before the spotlight ever found her. Crystal Gayle lost her father while she was still a child, at an age when safety is supposed to feel permanent. Melvin Ted Webb was a coal miner, and like many men in that line of work, his body paid the price. When his health began to fail, the family left Kentucky for Indiana, hoping better medical care might buy them time. It didn't. By the time Crystal was about 8 years old, her father was gone. That loss reshaped everything. Growing up without him wasn't just emotionally heavy, it was economically brutal. The Webb family had already known struggle, but his death sharpened it. There was less security, less margin for error, and a quiet awareness that nothing was guaranteed. Those early years carried a weight that never fully lifted, even as her life later filled with applause and success. Music became both an escape and a calling, and it came through the most obvious source: her older sister, Loretta Lynn. Loretta wasn't just a sibling, she was already a force, a legend in the making. Crystal admired her deeply, but admiration came bundled with pressure. From the outside, people were eager to frame their relationship as a rivalry, hungry for a story about tension and competition. The truth was far less dramatic. Both sisters later made it clear that the strain didn't come from resentment between them, but from constant comparison imposed by everyone else. Still, comparison has a way of seeping in, even when you don't invite it. Being measured against Loretta meant Crystal was rarely allowed to exist on her own terms. Every choice she made, every song she sang, was filtered through someone else's expectations. It wasn't about wanting to beat her sister. It was about trying to breathe in a space that didn't always leave room for her. As her career grew, another set of pressures followed. Touring, recording, and staying visible meant long stretches away from home. Like many artists, Crystal had to balance ambition with family and presence with absence. The sacrifices weren't glamorous. They were practical and painful, the kind you feel quietly at night when the noise fades and you're left with what you missed. Then there was the backlash. Today, country and pop blend freely. But when Crystal crossed that line, it wasn't welcomed. Her move toward pop success stirred controversy, and not everyone was kind about it. Purists questioned her loyalty to country music. Critics dismissed her evolution, and some fans saw it as betrayal rather than growth. What's now considered normal was, at the time, a risk that came with real consequences. Taken together, these weren't headline-grabbing scandals. They were quieter hardships, the kind that shape a person slowly. Loss, comparison, sacrifice, resistance. Crystal Gayle carried all of it while building a career that looked effortless from the outside, but was anything but. Crystal Gayle and Loretta Lynn, the sisterhood everyone got wrong. When Loretta Lynn and her little sister Crystal Gayle appeared together on the cover of People magazine in 1978, They looked untouchable. Two women at the very top of country music. Two sisters who had made it. But behind the polished smiles and styled hair, their dynamic was far more familiar than glamorous. It was sisterhood in its raw, everyday form. Crystal later remembered that even something as small as picking an outfit could turn into a big sister moment. She had brought two identical blouses in different colors to the shoot and couldn't decide which to wear. The decision was made for her. Loretta chose, and Crystal laughed about it years later, noting that this was simply what big sisters did. Bossy, protective, and convinced they knew best. As the younger sibling, Crystal leaned on Loretta more than people realized. Not just emotionally, but professionally. Loretta was the one who helped secure her first recording contract in 1970, and she didn't sugarcoat the advice that came with it. She warned Crystal not to sing anything that sounded like her own material, explaining that comparisons were inevitable and dangerous. There was already one, Loretta Lynn. The world didn't need another. Crystal later admitted that her sister had been absolutely right. By the time Crystal was finding her footing, Loretta's career was already roaring. A full decade earlier, Loretta had released her first single, I'm a Honky-Tonk Girl, followed by a run of hard-hitting, defiant hits that made her an international star. Songs about betrayal, strength, and survival turned her into a voice women recognized immediately. She had built something formidable long before Crystal ever stepped into a studio. Their childhoods, however, barely overlapped. When Crystal was born in 1951, the baby of the Webb family, Loretta and her husband had already left Kentucky for Washington State. That was where Loretta first learned to play and sing using a cheap Sears guitar that would quietly change her life. Crystal, meanwhile, grew up in Wabash, Indiana, where their father had relocated the family to a retired miners' community, and their mother worked long hours as a nurse's aide. Crystal was also the first Webb child born in a hospital, a small detail that always made her feel slightly removed from the rest. Loretta had tried, unsuccessfully, to help launch the music careers of other siblings. When Crystal showed real promise, she tried again. Summers were spent on the road, with Crystal touring alongside her sister, absorbing the pace, the pressure, and the performance. Loretta even gave her a name. Inspired by the Crystal hamburger chain scattered across the South, she suggested Crystal, believing it sounded bright and memorable. It stuck. At just 16, Crystal was handed a moment that could have gone very wrong. When Loretta fell ill, someone had to take her place on stage at the Grand Ole Opry. Loretta's husband talked his way into letting Crystal perform instead. Crystal later recalled knowing Loretta was sick and understanding how big the moment was, even then. Loretta's influence extended into the studio as well. When she wrote I've Cried, The Blue Right Out of My Eyes for Brenda Lee, Crystal made the case that the song belonged to her instead, pointing out that Brenda Lee's eyes weren't even blue. The argument worked. Though the song was only a modest hit in 1970, it became one of Crystal's earliest signature tracks. As Crystal's career expanded, especially after the massive success of Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue in 1977, the media shifted gears. Suddenly, the sisters were no longer framed as mentor and student. They were labeled rivals. The narrative intensified when Crystal won CMA Female Vocalist of the Year in 1977, beating Loretta. It was irresistible drama, even if it wasn't true. Crystal later acknowledged that she may have unintentionally added fuel to the rumors when she spoke about how Loretta's husband helped promote her early career. She explained that he had taken her to radio stations and helped her get started, but a careless comment from someone planted doubt. Crystal believed that once that seed was planted, it lingered quietly in Loretta's mind, even if nothing was ever said outright. Despite the noise, Crystal was clear years later that there was never real bad blood. She explained that sisters argued, clashed, and spoke their minds, but it was never serious. They laughed, moved on, and kept working. Loretta backed that up publicly in 1978. dismissing the rivalry as something imagined by outsiders. She admitted they fought occasionally, but only like sisters do, and never over the music business. She also acknowledged that Crystal had a style of her own, while she herself had no intention of leaving country music behind. Crystal, for her part, was watching closely. She admitted that she had learnt from watching Loretta's life, especially the grind. Loretta often didn't know her schedule until she was told. Crystal decided early on that she wanted more control. She wanted the ability to say no. That control came full circle decades later. When Crystal released You Don't Know Me in 2019, she invited Loretta and their sister, Peggy Sue Webb Wright, to sing on Put It Off Until Tomorrow, a song co-written by Dolly Parton and Bill Owens. Loretta recorded her vocals at Crystal's Nashville studio just months before suffering a stroke in 2017. Crystal later reflected on how special the moment was, recalling that Loretta walked in, sang her part, and immediately asked what was next. Crystal joked that if she'd had 10 songs ready, Loretta would have sung them all. By 2021, distance and the pandemic had kept them apart for a while, but Crystal never wavered in how she spoke about her sister. She said she felt proud and deeply honored to be Loretta Lynn's sister. And when Loretta passed at 90, it closed a chapter that had never been about rivalry at all, but about family, influence, and a bond the outside world never fully understood. Crystal Gayle was living a double life for 30 years. Now we know why. At 74, Crystal Gayle stands in a place few people ever see clearly. On the surface, her life looks settled, celebrated, and complete. The tours, the awards, the legacy. But that polished image has always been just one layer. Because while the world watched a country icon age gracefully in the spotlight, Crystal Gayle spent decades balancing something far more complicated behind the scenes. She isn't easing into retirement or quietly disappearing into nostalgia. She's still out there, still touring, still stepping onto stages across the United States, with upcoming dates stretching into 2026 in places like Florida and Texas. The schedule alone makes one thing clear: she's not done, not even close. What gives that longevity real weight is everything that came before it. Crystal Gayle isn't remembered only as a hitmaker from another era. She's widely credited as one of the most successful and influential country pop crossover artists of all time. When she blurred the lines between genres, she didn't just take a personal risk. She shifted the ground beneath the industry. Artists like Faith Hill, Shania Twain, and Carrie Underwood didn't walk into a welcoming space by accident. That door had already been cracked open. The numbers confirm it. Music writer Kevin John Coyne once pointed out that Crystal stacked 18 #1 hits over her career. That's more than her older sister, more than almost every woman in country music history. Only Dolly Parton, Reba McEntire, and Tammy Wynette sit ahead of her. It's a statistic that rarely gets centered, but it speaks volumes about how much she accomplished while never demanding the spotlight. In recent years, the industry has slowed down just enough to acknowledge what she built. In 2003, Country Music Television named her one of the 40 greatest women of country music. In 2008, she was inducted into the Kentucky Music Hall of Fame. A year later, she received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, surrounded by family and fellow artist Tanya Tucker. None of it felt like a late apology. It felt measured, earned. By 2016, the recognition became more reflective. The Academy of Country Music presented her with the Cliffy Stone Pioneer Award, honoring not just her success, but also her influence. Crystal responded in a way that felt unmistakably her, saying it was nice to think her music may have influenced other artists. No grand speech, no rewriting history, just a quiet acknowledgement. That same year, nearly 50 years after her first appearance as a guest performer, Crystal was invited to become a member of the Grand Ole Opry. The invitation came from Carrie Underwood, right after they performed Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue together. In January 2017, Crystal was officially inducted by her sister, Loretta Lynn. The moment tied everything together, where the story began, where it had carried her. The recognition continued. She was named one of country music's most powerful women in 2017. In 2019, she was chosen to help open the Country Music Association Awards during a tribute honoring women in country music. Once again, she sang "Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue." Decades later, the song still held the room. So did she. But Crystal Gayle's present isn't built on ceremonies alone. She's still actively performing, with a rescheduled concert already set for April 18, 2026 at Ponte Vedra Concert Hall. Her official website remains updated with tour dates, news, and merchandise. Her social media tells the same story. Photos from the road, stage lights, quiet moments between shows. She's exactly where she's always been most herself. In December 2025, she appeared on the Record, speaking openly about her marriage, her family, and the healing power of music. What stood out wasn't nostalgia. It was how clearly she still loves performing, not as an obligation, not as legacy maintenance, but as something essential. Her last studio album, You Don't Know Me, Classic Country, released in 2019, was her first in 16 years. Since then, she hasn't rushed to follow it. She hasn't vanished either. Crystal Gayle's story no longer lives only in albums or chart positions. It lives in packed halls, quiet interviews, and the tension between what the public has always seen and what she carried privately for decades. At 74, Crystal Gayle isn't circling the end of her story. She's still standing inside it, still singing. Which Crystal Gayle song is still your favorite to this very day? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.